Hi students, my name is Mrs. Stuckey and I am going to be teaching Meet the Masters this year. So the artist for September is Winslow Homer. Now let's find out a little bit about him. Winslow Homer was born in Boston in 1836. He was mostly self-taught, so he didn't have a lot of formal art classes or training. And when he was a young man, he moved to New York to become an illustrator. So there's an example on this slide of an illustration that he did for a magazine publication. They would have him go to events and do sketches of the event so that they could put them in the newspapers and the magazines. By the time Homer was 30, he was the most famous illustrator in the country, and this is another example of an illustration that he did of some children in the field. Now, during Homer's life, the Civil War started, and the magazines and the newspapers that hired him to illustrate picnics and events then hired him to illustrate and paint scenes from the Civil War. So he actually went down to the battlefronts and painted the soldiers so that they could have pictures and illustrations to put in their newspapers. We don't really know why, but in 1880, Winslow Homer withdrew from society, so he didn't want to see any of his friends and he didn't really want to go out in public and socialize. He stayed home a lot and did his artwork at home. In 1883, he decided to move up to Maine. He could have a lot more privacy and solitude. He could be on his own. There's not a ton of people that live in Maine, and he was able to paint there for the rest of his life. He kept in contact with his dad and his brothers, but not really any other social contacts. So because Homer lived in Maine and he spent most of his life on the Northeast coast, one of his very favorite things to paint was the ocean and the boats on it, also the everyday man. So he really loved to paint fishermen and fisherwomen and people at work. This is a picture, or a painting, I should say, entitled Breezing Up, and it is probably Homer's most famous painting. You'll see there's a handful of boys inside of a sailboat. So the art concept that we are going to be learning about this month is value. And value is really easy. It's just how light or how dark a color is. So if a color is super, super dark, it has a really high value. And if a color is super light, it has a lower value. So Homer used value in his paintings. You'll notice in this example, there's a higher value of blue here because the color is darker. There's a lower value of blue in this part of the ocean because the color is lighter. Now, if you were going to be coloring a picture of the ocean and you wanted to make a really high value and you wanted to make the color really dark, you would simply press harder with your crayon, right? And on the opposite way, if you wanted to make your value really low and you wanted to make your color very light, you would just simply color very lightly with your crayon. So it's a very simple concept, and I know you guys are going to nail it. Okay, so now it's time for a quiz. Let's see how well you were all paying attention. Our first question is, where was Winslow Homer born? Was he born A, in Denver, B, in Paris, or C, in Boston? If you answered C, Boston, you were correct. Great job. Question number 2. Which war did Homer paint? A, World War II, B, the 100 Years' War, or C, the Civil War? If you answered C, the Civil War, you are correct as well. Now, before we move on to the last question, you will notice this painting called Snap the Whip, which he painted in 1872. This is another one of his super, super famous paintings. And you'll notice the boys all playing a game called Snap the Whip where they're trying to get one of the boys to fall off, and it looks like they succeeded over there. Last question. What did Homer paint the most often? Was it A, the ocean, B, cats wearing hats, or C, Spring Lane Elementary? If you answered cats wearing hats, you were wrong. It is the ocean. Now, before we move on to the last slide, this is also another famous painting of Homer's. You'll see the everyday fisherman in his boat with some fish that he has caught. It's called the fog warning. It looks like he's noticing that a storm's coming in and he's got to get back to shore. I hope that was a good introduction to our artists this month. I can't wait to meet you all. We will do a fun piece of art together and have a great time. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.